Warning: the following film contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing. Blah 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 blah. Ragnar Lodbrok. The Viking legend, so famous. Historians still argue if he was one guy, 5 guys, or just ancient Norse propaganda with great hair. Supposedly born in the 9th century, Ragnar had a resume that included king, raider, serial monogamist, and snake enthusiast. Not by choice, more by execution method. This guy raided France and England like they were his personal buffet, sacked Paris before brunch, and had enough children to start his own bloodthirsty boy band. In fact, his sons would go on to have a lasting impact on future Viking adventures. Ragnar claimed descent from Odin, which in Viking terms was a bit like saying, "My dad can beat up your dad." The famous Viking sagas regale many of Ragnar's adventures, often describing him like some kind of comic book hero, such as the story when he assembled an army and sailed onwards to the Norse lands of Gotaland to confront and slay a ferocious dragon. And of course, tales of repeated raids on the British Isles just came with the territory of being a mighty Viking berserker. And this meant Ragnar would eventually cross swords with a particular King Aella of Northumbria. Ragnar learned that the cocky English king had massacred his men on Ireland, which of course he was completely incensed about, and he sought immediate revenge. But alas, this confrontation didn't go too well for him, as he was defeated and captured. King Aella ordered his execution. But this was no ordinary hack off a couple of limbs or a standard disembowelment of the time. Oh no, this was something far more exotic. Ragnar was tossed into a pit of snakes. Or at least that's what the writings from the time say. Even though it's worth pointing out that Northumbria isn't exactly well known for its deadly venomous creatures. The outback of Australia, it certainly isn't. But who knows, perhaps King Aella had put together his own personal collection of exotic snakes from far-off lands that he used for situations like this. And according to legend, Ragnar actually laughed while he was dying, which is either a sign of true Norse courage, or that he was so drugged up with snake venom, he was hallucinating. Ragnar Lodbrok, part myth, part man, and a great character in a TV show. And a strong reminder to never underestimate a guy with magnificent facial hair who's got a penchant for wearing bear pelts. Ivar the Boneless, the Viking Warlord with one of the least intimidating names in Norse history, because it sounds more like a chicken wing special. Born sometime in the 9th century, Ivar was a son of the legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, which basically meant destiny handed him an axe and said, "Go absolutely mental and kill everybody in sight." Which is pretty much what he did, leading the great heathen army across England with the zest of a rabid Rottweiler. Now, about that nickname, some historians suggest that boneless might have referred to some form of skeletal disease he could have suffered from, but of course without definitive proof of the condition, that's pure speculation. Or maybe, a bit like those modern-day wrestling folk, perhaps Viking record keepers just loved coming up with weird names for their kings and heroes? Either way, he wasn't exactly spineless and floppy in battle, as he brutally ravaged his way across great chunks of England. You see, he wasn't doing this Viking lark because of some extreme obscene pillaging addiction. Oh no, he was marauding his way around Europe for the pure love of conquest. He's most famous for avenging Daddy Ragnar's death by absolutely wrecking King Aella, reportedly using the blood eagle method, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. Imagine a Viking arts and crafts project, but with ribs. Ivar the Boneless, part warlord, part mystery, and all-out brutal maniac. Eric Bloodaxe, the Viking king with a name so subtle, you can guess he was someone who didn't really practice fair-handed diplomacy. Born around 885 AD, Erik was your average Norse overachiever, son of Harald Farhar, axe enthusiast, and part-time king of both Norway and Northumbria. Because apparently one kingdom just wasn't enough for him. His nickname Blood Axe came from his enthusiasm for wanting to swing his axe into all those people he didn't like too much. Needless to say, you didn't want to get on the wrong side of this fella. Erik's approach to leadership was refreshingly direct. Rule first, ask questions never. He was known for settling disputes the old-fashioned way, by making sure the other guy couldn't hold a sword anymore, presumably by using his favoured axe amputation method. After being booted out of Norway, family drama, long story, let's not go there, he popped over to England and briefly ruled over Northumbria. But in classic Viking soap opera style, his reign ended with betrayal. A surprise axe to the back, perchance? There you go, a dramatic death in 954. Erik Bloodaxe, a king, a thief, and an axe murderer. In other words, a proper Viking. Harald Haralda, the Viking who thought subtlety was for monks, and shields weren't necessary if you were a real tough guy. Born in 1015, he was the original action hero. Exiled prince, mercenary, Byzantine bodyguard, and occasional emperor in waiting. He once survived a battle at the tender age of 15, and then went on a decades-long gap year, rampaging around Eastern Europe. You know, for character development and all that. After stacking up a body count that would make a Lord of the Rings battle scene resemble an episode of The Golden Girls, Harald returned to Norway. Back in his Norse homeland, he was quick to play his part in a series of local entanglements. Here, the Norwegian/Danish king and Harald's nephew, Magnus the Good, or Magnus I of Norway, was fighting off the Danish pretender Sven Estridsson. Initially, Harald and Sven joined forces, but when Magnus offered Harald co-kingship of Norway, he quickly dropped Sven like a sack of spanners. Shortly afterwards, in 1047, Magnus died, and perhaps as a dying wish to put a stop to all this blooming Viking infighting, Magnus willed Norway to Harald, and Sven was left with Denmark. And so Harald became the king of Norway, and started to rule with the gentle touch of a psychotic loon. You see, not being content with just Norway, over the following years he and Sven often crossed swords, both on land and at sea. Harald plundering and ravaging many Danish settlements, but for whatever reason, he could never quite get his blood-stained hands on Denmark. But not to be deterred, at the age of 51, when most men are thinking about taking it a little bit easier and retiring, Harald invaded England, because someone slightly implied that he could be king there too. And it was in England where his reign ended, when he fell at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. Harald died the way he lived, dramatically, overdressed for battle, and 100% sure that he was winning right up until the moment he wasn't. Erik the Red, the Viking who used angry frustration as a type of weapon. Born in Norway in 950 AD, he moved from his homeland as a child because his father, Torvald, accidentally murdered a few people. So the family, en masse, moved to Iceland. A few years later, and a now adult Erik met his wife, Thorhild, and had 4 children. A daughter, Freydis, and 3 sons. The explorer Leif Erikson, Torvald, named after Erik's father, and Thorstein. Erik was very much a traditional Viking and a staunch follower of Norse paganism, although this didn't really influence the rest of his family, as his wife and son would eventually become Christians. Erik just didn't get Christianity. The Norse gods were way cooler. They were bloodthirsty, they fought monsters, and they drank mead. What's not to like there, eh? Thorhild was not impressed. In fact, the sagas even claim that she was so annoyed with Erik's disregard of Christianity. Her response to that was that a complete ban of any hanky-panky in the bedroom. And perhaps this was the very cause of Erik's increasing bouts of anger and frustration, leading to arguments with neighbours and a pile of corpses. And so, just like his father before him, Erik got himself exiled and got booted out of Iceland. So that meant him and his family had to move on somewhere else. Naturally, his solution was to discover an even more remote frozen wasteland, Greenland. He named it that to trick settlers into thinking it wasn't a snow-covered death trap, making him the very first real estate scammer in history. Ah, Greenland, he said, while frostbitten men wept silently behind him, wishing they were back in the slightly warmer climes of Norway. Meanwhile, Tjorhild, utilising her time on the frozen tundra to spread the word of Christianity to the local reindeer population, commissioned Greenland's very first church. Erik had fiery red hair, a volcanic temper, and an allergy to staying somewhere without starting a fight. And his greatest legacy would be his son, Leif Erikson, who went on to discover North America. Albeit there's still some speculation about whether he was actually the first European to discover the New World. But one thing's for sure, Erik proved that if you raise your kids on exile and homicide, you never know. They might just colonize a continent. Erik the Red, explorer, outlaw, and the only man to have ever seen a frozen hellscape and think, that'll be a nice place for a family home.